Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. A councillor from Fort Macleod is stepping down from town council as he heads to trial for a mischief charge in relation to the Coutts border blockade from 2022. Alberta Premier Daniel Smith was promoting more investment in Alberta during a recent trip to Washington. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will have the details. And there are reports surfacing that Israel and Hamas are getting closer to a new ceasefire.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. An Alberta town councillor who's facing charges related to the Coutts border blockade has resigned. Marco Van Hugenbos made the announcement during a recent council meeting in Fort Macleod. He says he's facing legal and personal challenges that may be indirectly casting the town in a negative light.
My goal in running for the town as council for the town of Fort Macleod has always been one to benefit the town, the community. I was never there for my objectives, my goals. I was there for the betterment of the community. Obviously, I had a view on issues and a position on issues, but it was always about. I was always there with the mindset of what is right for my community and to do right by my community, and with the essentially me going through the courts in the next couple months, if as a councillor would drag the town of Fort Macleod through the courts as well, and that would have a negative impact on the community.
Van Hugenbos is set to go to trial for a mischief charge in April. A frontline Alberta Mountie has been arrested for allegedly accessing police record systems to assist the country of Rwanda. The RCMP say it took measures to monitor, mitigate, and manage any further unauthorized disclosures once it learned of the security breach. The force adds the records were not top secret. Constable Eli de Toué is charged with breach of trust, unauthorized use of a computer, and breach of trust in respect to safeguarded information. Ukraine's military said it sank a Russian landing ship in the Black Sea off the coast of Crimea on Wednesday using naval drones. The report has not yet been confirmed by Russian forces. Powerful explosions could be heard, which suggested the ship was hit south of the town of Yalta. Ukraine's intelligence directorate released the video of what it said were Magura V-5 sea drones striking the ship. Ukraine has repeatedly hit Russia's Black Sea fleet in occupied Crimea. The UN says Ukrainian forces have had great victories over the past few months, inflicting heavy losses on the Black Sea fleet that has opened a corridor for Ukrainian grain exports. Ibrahim Hassouna's home was reduced to rubble in a barrage of airstrikes. He says Israeli warplanes attacked much of Rafah as cover for troops who were rescuing 2 Israeli hostages elsewhere in the southern Gaza town. He says he lost 8 of his relatives as a result of the attack.
أنا بحكي معك الآن بين الركاب بين أشلاء أهلي وبين أواعيهم وملابسهم. البحر لعند مستشفى أبو يوسف النجار بيبعد حوالي 13-14 كيلو عشان أتأكد بس إنه أهلي عايشين ولا استشهدوا. كانت وصل أول دفعة منهم كله أشلاء. أنا تعرفت عليهم لأنه كانوا مجهولين في المستشفى، ما حدش عارف مين هم لأنه مش مبين أثر. فهمتني؟ وبعدين لما طلع النهار وراقت الأمور بلشت أجيت هان وبديت أطلع في بقايا منهم.
There are new reports surfacing that Israel and Hamas were making progress toward another ceasefire and hostage release deal. We have more now in this report.
Top officials from the U.S., Israel, and Qatar are gathered in Cairo to work on these negotiations. Now, these efforts have been going on for several weeks, and so far there have been no breakthroughs. Israel wants Hamas to release the more than 100 hostages it's holding in Gaza. In return, Hamas wants Israel to free thousands of Palestinian prisoners it's holding. It also wants an end to Israel's war in Gaza. The international mediators, meanwhile, are interested in delaying, if not preventing altogether, a promised Israeli invasion of the southern border town of Rafah. That is where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have moved to flee the fighting in other parts of Gaza. Now, participating in the talks are senior officials, the head of the CIA, the head of Israel's Mossad spy service, and also the Prime Minister of Qatar are there. They've been meeting with Egypt's president. So far there are no breakthroughs, but the level of these negotiations and the level of these participants signal that the talks are beginning to get serious.
TBN Israel's Yair Pinto has been covering the Israel-Hamas war in the Middle East. He says Israel is purchasing an array of military aircraft and vehicles from the United States to help in their effort to destroy Hamas and to rescue the remaining hostages. He also talks about who the IDF is specifically targeting when it comes to the terrorist group Hamas.
At the head of the Rafah brigade of Hamas is Muhammad Shabana. He is amongst the most prominent leaders of the Hamas terrorist network in Gaza, and his name is high on Israel's most wanted list. We have another 134 abductees that we're looking for, and not all of them will be rescued in such a dramatic way. But the Hamas leaders who are continuing to hold these hostages have been put on notice that the IDF can reach out and find whoever and whatever they're looking for.
The U.S. House has approved articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas over border security issues. It's been a deeply partisan and highly unusual attack on a cabinet official. A reporter from the Associated Press explains what happens next.
House Republicans have voted to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. House Republicans needed a simple majority for this second vote to succeed. A previous attempt to impeach the secretary last week failed after all Democrats and a handful of Republicans voted against it. So what does this mean? The House has approved articles of impeachment against Mayorkas, but it's not the same thing as removal from office. Impeachment is a tool that Congress can use to try to get rid of officials, but it is rare for it to be used for a cabinet secretary. The last time it happened was in 1876. In this case, Republicans in the House say that Mayorkas has refused to comply with immigration laws, and that is what is leading to the surge of migrants at the southern border. Mayorkas says that these charges are baseless, and Democrats and legal experts have said that this is essentially a policy dispute between Democrats and Republicans, and that impeachment is not justified in this type of a situation.
The allegations are baseless, and I'm focused on the work.
Now the issue goes to the Senate. The Senate can either hold a trial on the articles of impeachment, or they can decide to send the issue to a committee for its own investigation.
U.S. President Joe Biden slammed his rival Donald Trump for his, quote, un-American comments over the weekend. Trump encouraged Russia to do whatever it wants to NATO countries that he believes do not pay enough to the alliance.
Just a few days ago, Trump gave an invitation to Putin to invade some of our allies, NATO allies. He said if an ally didn't spend enough money on defense, he would encourage Russia to, quote, do whatever the hell they want, end of quote. Can you imagine a former president of the United States saying that? The whole world heard it. The worst thing is he means it.
Well, the carbon price here in our country is going up another $15 per ton, but government officials say Canadian families will see a bigger rebate as a result. Families will receive between $760 and $2,160 in carbon price rebates this year. That'll be $64 more every 3 months in Alberta and $36 more in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. Labour Minister Seamus O'Regan says that big polluters will be paying more while families will receive more in their bank accounts. However, the move to lift carbon pricing from home heating oil for 3 years will mean people in Atlantic provinces, except for New Brunswick, will see a dip in the amount that they receive. Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is thinking of pulling the plug on the coalition with the Trudeau government. He says in order to keep the supply and confidence deal alive, the Liberals would have to table a bill that sets the foundation for a single-payer universal pharmacare before a looming deadline.
My sense right now is I don't know which way it's going. And that's why I made it very clear to the Prime Minister that that's what we expect. And after that meeting, I said that it was a difficult meeting because I did not get clear assurances that this would be resolved. And that's why I'm saying very clearly to Justin Trudeau and to the Liberals, you can't keep on stringing Canadians along. You can't keep on breaking your promise. We expect legislation that lays out that foundation, and it's got to be universal and single payer. We're not saying the money's got to be in the budget. That's never been our ask, and we've never said that. So the Liberals try to spin folks and say that's what we're asking for. It's not the case. But we do expect legislation that lays the foundation, and that's what we're asking for. The Liberals know that. Justin Trudeau knows that, and we'll see what happens on March 1st.
Premier Daniel Smith recently returned from a visit to Ottawa, Toronto, and Washington. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson says Smith was out touring and promoting investment in our province.
So this has been sort of a consistent area where the Alberta government's been spending time and money in building relationships and trying to get U.S. investment into the oil sands. For a long time, there was lots of lobbying about the Keystone XL pipeline. So, it's come to fruition in some ways. I think there are relationships being built and things like that. In other ways, it's been less successful. Of course, Joe Biden scrapped the Keystone XL pipeline permits on his first day in office. And so one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this trip was that Smith was, of course, asked about the U.S. election, which is happening in November of this year. And she said, look, whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden who's reelected, there's going to be some problems for Alberta and for Canada as a whole because of those protectionist stances.
Mr. Dawson will also discuss who's put their name forward to become the new leader of the Alberta NDP. Watch for that Q&A coming up later in our broadcast. A new study out says diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at businesses and post-secondaries can lead to even more bigotry and prejudice. The report released by the Aristotle Foundation for Public Policy casts serious doubt on the effectiveness on the training, which is supposed to address systemic racism. Now, to talk about this in more detail is the author of the study, social scientist David Millard Haskell from Wilfrid Laurier University. He joins us now from Waterloo, Ontario. So, David, I'm guessing this was quite the eye-opener for you, which is a possible reason why you called your study Reality Check?
It was actually a surprise because this information is out there. And what I didn't create anything new. I just simply gathered up the studies that already exist, and then I've just packaged it. And I said, this is what DEI really, what we know about DEI, what has been proven about DEI. What's curious to me is why this has been ignored. And that's why we call it a reality check.
Now, supporters of DEI training praise its efficacy, but you say that wasn't really the case from your research?
No, not at all. What's incredibly surprising is that when DEI consultants and the people in the office say this stuff works, they actually don't have any proof of that. What I was able to determine by looking at numerous meta-analyses. Now, meta-analyses are when they take hundreds of studies and they statistically analyze it in aggregate. What it found was there's no empirical proof that it does anything good. But it does show, there are certain studies that show it can do harm.
Well, let's talk about some of that harm right now. Your report highlighted several key concerns. What were they?
A few things that I think many people should be concerned about. Keep in mind, this stuff is often mandatory in many businesses, and it's across our K-12 and even in our universities. It's been shown to actually increase bigotry, increase prejudice, and in particular, against the majority population, whites.
Wow. Now, many would argue that there's a lot of value in diversity in society, but you caution against the divisive nature of DEI instruction. Can you explain?
What I'd say, Hal, is that we actually were really doing great in terms of our decrease in racist attitudes across Canada and the U.S. If you look from the 1960s into the early 2000s, even into the mid-2000s, every sociological indicator was showing that we were going down in racist attitudes. What were we doing? We were simply saying, judge people on the content of their character. We had a method that was working that said, treat everybody equally. Now, DEI actually reverses that and says, we should actually, when it's necessary, discriminate. And that's not a recipe for success. And I think that that's something we need to abandon and return to the ways that we're working.
David Millard Haskell from Wilfrid Laurier University and author of the DEI study, Reality Check. Thanks for joining us today from Waterloo, Ontario. The Alberta government gave approval to the Lethbridge and District exhibition to move forward with a Memorandum of Understanding, which was approved by Lethbridge City Council back on January the 23rd. The MOU allowed for a change in governance structure to take place. The past LDE board resigned, and a new board of directors has been appointed. The new board includes co-chair Lloyd Brierley and Cole Beck, with Carly Kleisinger and Jennifer Place being named vice chairs. Beck says having both the city and Lethbridge County involved will create more business continuity.
So I think it's just important that we have that representation so that we can let the community, the region, and the province know that we are and remain open for business. I mean, we consider ourselves the agricultural center of the province. I mean, we do nearly $4 billion in agricultural economic activity in the region. And so having an event center like this and being able to showcase what we are, what the region represents, and all of those different activities is a real opportunity for us and all of our ratepayers. And so to Lloyd's comments earlier, as we work through some of those third-party reviews and processes, we'll have a better understanding of what the Lethbridge District Exhibition opportunities are and how that represents our community in the region.
Lethbridge City Council has designated Whitney Block as a municipal historic resource. The vote passed unanimously at City Council on Tuesday. The three-story Whitney Block, located at 411 3rd Avenue South, is a brick building built in 1907, located close to Galt Gardens at the downtown core. It's known for its associations with the commercial development of Lethbridge. The Whitney Block building now becomes the city's 30th municipal historic resource. It was designed by Medicine Hat architect William T. Williams around 117 years ago. Wow. The City of Lethbridge announced that seasonal job opportunities are now available with the city. Officials say each spring they look to hire around 50 laborers to help their public operations teams. Officials say they have a number of positions available that need filling this summer.
So we have positions available in parks and cemeteries, water and wastewater, transportation, arenas, waste and recycling, and so on. These positions are 40 hours per week, so they're full-time, weather permitting, and they go from May till about September, depending on your availabilities. So these positions are really great for students who are looking for a summer job, but if you're looking to start a career with the City of Lethbridge, it's a great starting point as well.
Officials say more on the job postings can be found on the City of Lethbridge website. Well, today is a very special day. It's Valentine's Day. Got the red tie on here. A day to celebrate those we love. Pastors Kelly and Joylyn Stickle from Parallel Church here in Lethbridge have been married close to 30 years. They say the key to a healthy relationship is to be able to read each other's love languages.
With the love languages, like mine are words of affirmation. Mine are most of them, but he says I'm either easy to love or hard to love because I'll take it all. But I'm easy to love, right?
Yes, very much.
So words of affirmation, if he doesn't as much get that or feel loved by that. He feels loved more by the acts of service and stuff. So if I'm constantly just gushing on him with words but don't do anything for him, he's not going to feel that as much.
Make sure you catch the full fun interview with the Lovebirds, Pastors Kelly and Joylyn Stickle from Parallel Church here in Lethbridge and BCN's Naveen Day coming up later in our broadcast. Well, we enjoyed a mainly clear sky here in southwestern Alberta for Valentine's Day, but hold on, there's a chance of more clouds rolling in and light flurries developing later this evening. Full weather details are on deck. It was a cooler Valentine's Day today in Lethbridge as we were well below our seasonal value for this time of year. Tonight, expect an overnight low near -18 with a chance of some flurries developing. Thursday, a 30% chance of snow once again with a high of only -12. Now the clouds should clear out on Friday. We'll see lots of sunshine and a high near -7. Not a bad weekend is shaping up so far. Saturday, expect lots of sunshine, a clear sky and a high of +2. Sunday, a high near 3 degrees. Monday, the mercury will climb even further, up to 5 degrees, and Tuesday, dipping slightly to 4 degrees under a partly cloudy sky. Let's check the almanac now. Now, the average high for this time of year is +1 and an average low of -11. The record high was 13 degrees set back in 1971, and the record low was a very chilly -32, 1978. The sun rose at 7:43 and set at 5:49. Let's see how the rest of the country is shaping up for Thursday now. Expect rain and a high of 8 degrees for Victoria, partly cloudy and 7 degrees in Vancouver. In Calgary, pretty cloudy day with lots of flurry activity and a high of only -11. In Edmonton, lots of sunshine and a high near 8 degrees, -8. A good chance of snow developing and flurries in Regina with a high of only -12 degrees. Saskatoon, partly cloudy and a little bit cooler at -14. Winnipeg, sun mixed with clouds and a high of -12. Now in the central part of the country, let's see what's going to be happening in Toronto. It'll be rain mixed with snow and a high of only -1 tomorrow. Ottawa, mostly cloudy with flurries and a high of -4. In Montreal, partly cloudy with a high near -3. In Atlantic Canada, the sky should clear in Fredericton, New Brunswick, partly cloudy and a high of -1. In Halifax, expect lots of snow and a high of 0. In Charlottetown, lots of cloud cover as well, overcast with flurries and a high of -2. And in St. John's, rain mixed with snow and a high near +1. January home sales in Canada jumped 22% compared with a year ago. According to the Canadian Real Estate Association, it is the largest year-over-year gain since May of 2021. CREA says the increase reflected weakness last year, which saw the worst start to almost any year in the past 2 decades. The national average home price was up 7.6% from last January to $659,400. RBC says a cap on new study permits will not lead to an outright decrease in demand for rental housing from international students this year. Officials at the bank did say, however, that the expected increase in rental demand from international students could be cut in half. Ottawa recently announced a temporary cap on new study permits over the next couple of years as it tries to get a handle on sharp growth in international student enrollments at Canadian colleges and universities. A BC nonprofit group says athletic wear giant Lululemon is misleading consumers about its environmental impacts. Stand.Earth says it has asked Canada's Competition Bureau to investigate the Vancouver-based company. In a statement, Stand.Earth says Lululemon has been using the slogan, "Be Planet," as part of its impact agenda released in 2020. The company's own reports, however, show it has doubled its greenhouse gas emissions since then. It says Lululemon's reports show total greenhouse gas emissions have gone from about 830,000 tons in 2020 to almost 1.7 million tons today. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 304 points on the day to finish at 20,889. The Dow was up 151 points to 38,424. The S&P 500 was up 47 on the day to 5,000, and the Nasdaq was up 203 points to 15,859. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $1.23 to $76.64 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 8 cents to $1.61 US. Gold was down 81 cents to $19.9233 US an ounce, and silver was up a quarter to $22.37 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.22 per bushel, barley's at $6.07, canola's at $13.47, and corn is at $7.39 per bushel. Live cattle were down $1.35 to $182.40. Feeder cattle March contract was down $1.78 to $246.23, and lean hogs were up 95 cents to 75.18. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 73.82 US. Recapping one of our top stories, an Alberta town councillor who is facing a charge related to the Coutts border blockade has resigned. Marco Van Hugenbos made the announcement during a recent council meeting in Fort Macleod. He says he's facing legal and personal challenges that may indirectly cast the town in a negative light. He's set to go to trial for a mischief charge in April. Alberta Premier Daniel Smith recently returned from a trip to Ottawa, Toronto, and Washington promoting investment here in our province. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will share details with us momentarily. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of our local stories, visit our website, bridgecitynews.ca. Alberta Premier Daniel Smith recently went on a tour of Ottawa, Toronto, and Washington, where she chatted up our economy and some investment opportunities. Now, in Washington, she met with a number of senators and congressmen. Now, to talk about this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who joins us once again from Edmonton. Tyler, we've seen in the past that both U.S. President Joe Biden and Donald Trump have strong protectionist policies. Do you think this trip by Premier Smith will help, especially when it comes to Alberta energy exports?
Well, one would hope. During the Kenney government's years in power, they put a lot of effort into sort of cross-border lobbying with offices in Washington and things like that. You remember that Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, who's a pretty crucial pro-energy vote in the Senate, was in Alberta for a tour. So this has been sort of a a consistent area where the Alberta government's been spending time and money in building relationships and trying to get U.S. investment into the oil sands. For a long time, there was lots of lobbying about the Keystone XL pipeline. So, it's come to fruition in some ways. I think there are relationships being built and things like that. In other ways, it's been less successful. Of course, Joe Biden scrapped the Keystone XL pipeline permits on his first day in office. And so one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this trip was that Smith was, of course, asked about the U.S. election, which is happening in November of this year. And she said, look, whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden who's reelected, there's going to be some problems for Alberta and for Canada as a whole because of those protectionist stances. Of course, Canada's largest trading partner is the United States, and a lot of Alberta's energy exports go to the United States along with other products. So, it's a really interesting time, I think, federally between the two governments in Ottawa and in Washington and whoever is the president in a year's time, but also, provincial politicians, whether that's, Doug Ford in Ontario, big auto manufacturer, things like that, or Alberta, big energy exporter. The U.S. political scene, I think, is one that everyone's going to be watching both inside and outside of politics quite closely for the next several months.
Now, the Alberta government's moratorium on green energy development ends at the end of the month, Tyler. It was a controversial proposal that officials said was meant to give the government time to create rules around things like land reclamation. Now, of concern for the province is the possible use of farmland. Where do we stand with that right now?
Well, the moratorium comes to an end, I think, on February 29th. And so this didn't impede projects that were already approved, projects that were already under construction, things like that. But it did sort of pause the approvals of new projects. And as you said, the argument being that there just weren't, structures set up around this, around like reclamation and land use and environmental impacts, things like that. So that's what sort of this year-long pause was meant to figure out. And it's now coming to an end, and there will be guidelines that are coming out towards the end of the month around green energy investment in the province. The thing that will sort of remain on the radar that's probably of sort of most interest to Albertans is that Danielle Smith said pretty clearly last week that they were not going to allow this development on prime agricultural land. So, you're not going to, they don't, I think the word she used was sterilize prime agricultural land. So they would be looking at projects, can you still have agricultural land around a windmill? Can cattle be grazing around a windmill? Those sorts of things are going to be part of the development considerations going forward. And this has been, I think, pretty hotly anticipated because Alberta is very much the destination for renewable energy development in the country. It's sort of well outpacing everybody else. And so that's part of the reason why there was so much shock and concern when this moratorium was announced. This is a booming industry in some ways, and why is the government putting the brakes on it? So, presumably once the moratorium lifts, once the new rules are in place, things will take back off again.
Tyler, it appears as though 3 people have now thrown their hats to the ring to become the new leader of the Alberta NDP. Calgary MLA Kathleen Ganley and Edmonton MLA Sarah Hoffman and Raki Pancholi. Now, of the 3, you say Pancholi made some of the biggest waves recently. Why is that?
Well, so she went on a sort of Edmonton talk radio podcast show, and one of the things that she talked about was the carbon tax. And she said, look, there isn't public support for the carbon tax. There's never been public support in Alberta for a consumer carbon tax. And it's maybe about time that we start thinking about other ways to tackle climate change. And so that was obviously kind of shocking because the NDP, the Alberta NDP, was the government in Alberta that brought in a carbon tax in 2015. It was then repealed by Kenny's government in 2019, and now it's a federal carbon tax that's in place here. But it was just kind of shocking because generally the defenders of the carbon tax are on the left or the progressive side of the spectrum, and it's conservative politicians who've said, people really don't like this, maybe we should get rid of it. So it was just a bit of a change of tone, shall we say, from a progressive politician. Now, Pancholi was not actually a part of the Notley government between 2015 and 2019. She came into politics after that. So, maybe she gets a bit of a pass on not being affiliated with the Notley carbon tax when it was announced. And the funny thing about it is, so she said that, and then Hoffman and Ganley both kind of followed her and said, well, actually, yeah, the support for the carbon tax might be gone. It might be a dead policy. The Liberals have, one of the things Pancholi said was she pointed to the Liberals' changes in the carbon tax in the Maritimes, taking it off of home heating fuels, which was obviously really controversial. And so a bit of a funny position here where we have Raki Pancholi and Danielle Smith to some extent making the exact same argument around the carbon tax.
Yeah, home heating is for oil, but we'd love to see it come off of natural gas as well, especially for us here in the West. Now, Tyler, part of Kathleen Ganley's platform is that she has made a pitch on affordability. She said that the carbon tax as well is a federal issue, but that Albertans should receive an income tax exemption. How much?
Well, it would be about $4,000 or $5,000. So, Alberta has, until you make about $21,000 a year, that money is already exempted from the provincial income tax. So, regardless of whether you make $30,000 or $130,000, that first $21,500 or so is tax-free in Alberta. And so what Ganley was proposing was to actually just bump up that limit. Now, it does come up most years as a result of it's indexed to inflation often, although there was a controversy a couple years ago, I believe, where it was de-indexed from inflation. But at any rate, if that number, goes up, that means a couple $1,000s tax-free in Alberta, and so that would obviously save people a little bit of money. The numbers are not spectacularly humongous generally when we're looking at those sorts of things, but it would be something. Who knows? Maybe it would be comparable to what Albertans end up paying in the carbon tax each year. So I think, not only does this say something about the carbon tax and maybe where the political consensus is moving on it, but it also says a fair bit about what I think is going to be one of the big issues in this race, and that's affordability. The NDP are in sort of a good position to talk about affordability because they're not in government. It's very hard to defend your record on affordability, I think, when you're in government. We see that with the federal Liberals. We're seeing that with provincial governments right across the country. So it's a good tack for them to really to go after the UCP, I think. And I would imagine that we're going to see a lot of that from the leadership candidates. I imagine we're going to see a lot of that from the NDP as a whole. And it'll be interesting to see how each of the candidates tries to differentiate themselves, what policies they're going to propose to sort of tackle some of that. And Ganley looks like she's one of the first out of the gate with a concrete proposal to get some more money into Albertans' pockets.
Now, Tyler, there's some word as well coming out of Calgary that former Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi is also considering entering the race to become the new leader of the Alberta NDP. Mm-hmm. He's currently exploring the possibility. What are you hearing?
Yeah, he's been pretty quiet. I've reached out to him a couple times and been like, "Hey, do you want to tell me what you're planning on doing here?" But no, he's been relatively quiet, I would say, in terms of confirming or denying what he's going to do. Although he has been out in public a little bit. He spoke at a big rally a week or so ago regarding Danielle Smith's transgender policies. Obviously, he opposes them. And gave quite a rousing speech to the protesters outside City Hall. So, he's sort of around, right? Like, he's been in the public sphere. He's been writing a little bit, doing media interviews a little bit, criticizing Danielle Smith, those sorts of things. So he's circling the political arena regardless of what he decides to do. If he decides to run for leader of the NDP, though, I think it'll be a fairly cataclysmic event. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first is that Nenshi is not, a super left-wing guy. His color, he always says, is purple, a mix of orange and blue. And so that's been one of the discussions about the Alberta NDP is, do they need to move more to the center to win? Do they need to move further to the left to have, really differentiated policies from the UCP? So I think it'll cause a little bit of internal friction in the New Democrats if he enters the race and starts proposing moving a little bit more to the center. The other thing that would be really interesting if he does that is he's known Danielle Smith for a very, very long time. They went to university together. They were in the same classes together. I believe Stephen Harper was actually one of their TAs when they were at the University of Calgary together. So he has a really, really long history with Smith, and in that sense knows her quite well. And he's a relatively savvy politician, and he's really well known. He's a household name, I think, almost everywhere in Alberta probably, which is not to criticize the other candidates, but not necessarily the case for Sarah Hoffman or Kathleen Ganley or Raki Pancholi or some of the other folks that people are talking about.
Now, there are reports that the provincial New Democrats are really not impressed with the federal New Democrats, in particular Ontario NDP Charlie Angus. Tyler, can you explain why that is?
Yeah, so Charlie Angus proposed legislation that would basically ban or criminalize the advertisement of fossil fuels. He says that this is having environmental impacts, having health impacts. Just like big tobacco can't advertise cigarettes, perhaps fossil fuel companies should not be able to advertise their products. unsurprisingly, this has been rather controversial. Premier Danielle Smith saying it's an insane idea, is not in favor of it. And that more or less is echoed by the Saskatchewan and Alberta New Democrats, who said, look, this creates great jobs for people, creates a lot of money that comes into the provincial coffers. We've, high environmental standards in Alberta's oil and gas sector, that sort of thing. So, one of the things about the NDP is that it's not like the federal Liberals or the Conservatives. When you become a member of the Alberta NDP or the Saskatchewan NDP, you also become a member of the federal NDP. So there is this relationship that exists provincially to nationally in a way that isn't the case everywhere. It is in some provinces for members of the Liberal Party, the Alberta Liberals or the federal Liberals or whatever. So it's been a bit of a discussion for a while whether or not these provincial New Democrat parties should sort of divorce themselves from the federal NDP in some fashion. We talked, I think, a month or two ago about a possible name change for the Alberta New Democrats. So, is this going to totally fracture the provincial federal relationship between the parties? Maybe, maybe not. But it is an example of where there's some pretty serious policy disagreements, I think. And that's the case for pipelines. Rachel Notley has not been particularly friendly towards Jagmeet Singh, for example. But still a fun story, and it's always good to have some cross-jurisdictional conflict when you're in the news business.
A new leader, maybe a new name for the party as well, create that separation, like you said, from the federal NDP. Now, Tyler, with increased immigration and a growing population in our province, many of our social services are being stretched thin, from education to healthcare and housing. And the Alberta Medical Association is saying there's a real risk that our growing population is going to make the healthcare situation even worse, and it'll be harder and harder for people to find a family physician.
Yeah, and it makes sense as sort of a matter of common sense, right? Like if you have X amount of doctors and you have, double or triple the number of people coming in, obviously doctors are going to have to take on more and more and more and more patients, or people are going to be going without family physicians. So that's one of the things that they've flagged. They said, look, we have this in-migration to Alberta each year, huge numbers of people, tens of thousands of people, I believe, and we're not having sort of proportionate numbers of healthcare professionals coming into the province. So maybe there's political reasons for that. Maybe there's policy the government could introduce or something like that would make Alberta a more attractive destination for physicians. But at the end of the day, when people are already struggling to find primary care providers, it certainly suggests that if population continues to grow, whether from immigration or interprovincial migration, that it is going to sort of strain an already strained healthcare system.
Firefighting groups, along with the Alberta NDP, are calling on the UCP to release its wildfire plan. Tyler, it was a record-breaking wildfire season last year, and the government said it's been working on policy?
Yeah, so last year was like an incredibly bad wildfire season, if anyone has forgotten. And I think it was about 2.2 million hectares burned last year. And actually, some of those fires are still burning over the winter, sort of under the snow or in brush and things like that. So there's a real concern that the wildfire season coming up, which begins in a month or two, I think, technically speaking, is going to be another really, really bad one. And so the government has been working on its plan for tackling this, and municipalities and the NDP and firefighting organizations are saying, we haven't seen the plan. Wildfire season is like 6 or 8 weeks away. Can we see the plan? So the NDP has been raising a little bit of trouble about that the last little while. I don't think it's a massive political story. I don't think it's a massive issue that has really got people worked up, but certainly something to think about because wildfires affect all of us, and people are no doubt curious what the plans are for this year.
Yeah, I got a plan. Pray for more rain and more snow. We need a lot more moisture right now.
It's as good as any, isn't it?
Yeah. He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Thanks so much for joining us today from Edmonton.
Thanks for having me, Hal.
Many people agree that marriage is a relationship ordained by God, but it can be tricky to keep that relationship thriving. Today's guests are going to help us do that. Kelly and Joylyn Stickle are a husband and wife team, and they are the lead pastors of Parallel Church right here in Lethbridge. Pastors Kelly and Joylyn, welcome back to Bridge City News. It's great to have you on today.
Thanks, that was great to be here.
Excellent. Now, I'm curious, how long have you two been married now?
28 years.
Oh, wow.
I have to double check that, yeah.
Been a while.
To look at each other. So the romance sometimes can fade in marriage, and it's entirely possible that we may not even notice the signs. Why is that?
I think it's easy to just kind of do the motions, go through life, especially when things get busy and you have kids and the kids get busy and stuff. And so it's easy to kind of lose that and not see it happen unless you're intentional. I think intentional is a big part of marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. It's easy to drift. It's easy to have just the busyness of life kind of occupy or preoccupy what the focus is. So like Jordan said, is you have to be intentional in making effort to make sure that the marriage is priority over all of the distractions that can potentially come.
Yeah.
And once you notice the romance thermometer is dropping down, what steps should be taken to get the temperature back up again?
I think a big part of that again is the intentionality of making sure daily you're having connected time with one another, that whether that's a deep conversation or whatever, just to make sure that a priority daily. Weekly, it's great to go on dates and set aside an evening or time with each other.
Yeah.
We like to quarterly get away for a night or two, yearly go on a holiday that just the two of us away from the kids and distractions of life, and kind of rekindle relationship that way. But again, it's intentionally saying, okay, we're going to put that in our calendar. We're going to make it a priority, make our marriage a priority, and focus on doing just that, and put it in the calendar, not just saying we want to, but actually put it in the calendar.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the Bible says where your treasure is, your heart is there also. And so I think it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical treasure, but if you figure out what your spouse's love language is and how they feel loved and connected, then intentionally putting that treasure into your marriage, your heart will follow if it's kind of lagging behind. But yeah, I think it's easy, like we had said, it's easy to kind of get overwhelmed and just go through the motions. So just being intentional, putting it in your calendar is a big part of it.
Now let's talk about married couples for a bit here, because long ago I was married and didn't last very long, but I want to talk about like the honeymoon phase, because that can wear off sometimes. And I noticed that very early on into my marriage, I started noticing things like, oh, like she's snoring louder than she normally does, or like has her morning breath always been that pungent? So what are some steps to stay in that honeymoon phase or keep it going longer?
I think the honeymoon stage is often what we classify as the feelings of love, that feeling part of love, which is there, and it's a real thing. But love is much deeper than just the emotions that we feel on a time. And so when we get familiar with someone and we get to know them, we get to see the real them. Sometimes the feelings aren't there, but what Paul describes love in 1 Corinthians 13 is like, love is patient. Well, I don't remember the last time I had the feeling of being patient. It's not a feeling driven thing at all. And love is kind. Love doesn't envy. Love keeps no record of wrongs. None of what he lists in 1 Corinthians 13 is based on feelings. So there are decisions that we have to make on a daily basis and push beyond the feelings, the emotions, the triggers, all those things, and just say no, despite the nuances of being imperfect people with one another, that we're going to push beyond that and choose to love, choose to be kind, choose to be patient, choose to be keep no records of wrong, and make those choices every day.
Yeah. And I think it's important to recognize that, especially however long we've been married, you're always growing as a person, or you should be always growing as a person, and your spouse is always growing as a person. So if you are stuck in who they were when you were dating, and not allowing them the chance to grow and the growing pains that go with that, then you're taking away a lot of what real life is. And the beauty of being in a partnership like a marriage is that you get to grow each other, and you get to iron sharpens each other, right?
Right.
And it's a cool thing to just give them the space give yourself the space to become who you're becoming. And that is hard sometimes, right?
Yes.
Now, obviously, it's important for couples to communicate in some fashion that you love and appreciate one another. I mean, I've heard some guys say like, well, I told you when I met you I love you, and if anything changes, I'll let you know. Obviously, that's not healthy. So any suggestions on how we can do this and how often we need to show our love and appreciation?
Love languages.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you should be the biggest cheerleader for your spouse, and you should be the biggest student of your spouse. And so figuring out who they are and how they feel love, and yeah, and show them that way, because they're going to feel it better that way. So with the love languages, like mine are words of affirmation. Mine are most of them, but he says I'm either easy to love or hard to love, because I'll take it all. But I'm easy to love, right?
Yes. Very easy.
So words of affirmation, if he doesn't as much get that, or feel loved by that, he feels loved more by the acts of service and stuff. So if I'm constantly just gushing on him with words but don't do anything for him, he's not going to feel that as much. And so again, being intentional, being the student of your spouse, and making it your priority to study who they are and how they feel loved is a big part of it.
And if couples haven't read that book, The 5 Love Languages, it's a must for every marriage. And the natural tendency for all of us is, like Joylyn said, is to give what we receive naturally ourselves, is to give that back. But that's not necessarily the language that our spouse receives. And so we need to be able to speak their language over our own preferences, and give preference to what they need most, and do that on a daily basis. Like that's not something that you let slide for a while and say at the altar and never say again. like it's a daily practice of making sure that they feel loved and cherished, and our priorities over anyone and everyone else.
Yeah.
I agree what you said about the 5 love languages, because it's amazing that that book has really gained popularity even in non-faith relationships. In fact, being on dating apps, I've noticed a lot of people are even asking what their love languages, asking each other what their love languages are, or saying these are my love languages, or they're sharing their Myers-Briggs. But what really fascinated me was they are talking about love languages. So I think that's really fascinating, that something that came from a Christian author is really so popular amongst all kinds of relationships here. Now, I've also noticed that marriage experts encourage couples to find things that they both enjoy and to do those things together. But that can be tough to find time with kids and work, etc. So how do you find time?
I don't think you ever find time. I think you have to make time.
You claim time.
You claim time. And I think you have to make it a priority and saying, okay, well, if we just wait to find time, life's going to eat that up really quick. I think you have to be intentional and make the time, and pay attention rather than just get distracted or what grabs your attention. Pay attention, make the effort to pay attention to your spouse, make the time to be together and to do things that you enjoy together.
And I think it's super healthy for kids to see a strong relationship between parents and to not be the center of attention. So they're going to go into stronger relationships when they're older if they've seen it demonstrated throughout their life, and they've seen dad prioritize mom over them sometimes too, right? And vice versa. And so you're helping your children by showing them how a good relationship works, and that mom and dad are prioritized, and that gives them security as well, to know that that they're secure in the family.
Now, today's couples typically watch a lot of TV programs together, and there's a lot of binge-worthy content out there. But they can also get influenced by social media, and this can portray a somewhat unrealistic view of what a husband or wife should look like and how they should behave. Do we need to adjust our marriage expectations?
Absolutely. I think social media has probably done a greater disservice, I think, than even television lately.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times what we do, walk right into the comparison trap where we begin to compare our behind the scenes to somebody's highlight reels. And we have to recognize that what is portrayed on social media is somebody's highlight reels. You're not seeing behind the scenes. You're not seeing all the messes and the messiness of life that is real.
Yep.
And so it's dangerous to watch somebody on social media or watch a marriage on social media and going, oh, I wish my husband was like, or I wish my wife was more like, or I wish our marriage was like that. A very dangerous thing to do, to walk into that comparison trap. And it puts undue expectations on yourself, but undue expectations on your spouse, and recognize, hey, our marriage is different than anybody else's, but this is our marriage. We don't, this is our relationship. This is our personalities coming together to becoming one. And it's not going to look like everybody else's.
And over time, we can start to get critical of one another, especially like if we're seeing the same person every single day, day in, day out, every day, every weekend. How can couples break that cycle of negative communication?
In the art of communication, like, psychologists will talk about changing the story in your head. And oftentimes we go in with a preconceived, especially to those that we're closest with, we go into a preconceived idea of, oh, they did that on purpose, or they're trying to, and we ended up getting critical because they forgot this again, or there's just like them this. And psychologists say, change the story in your head. And like Joylyn said, is hey, when we were in love, when we got married, why would somebody who loves me so much promise, their lives with mine? Why would they intentionally try to hurt me? If I can change the story, they're not intentionally trying to hurt me. And just simply changing the story in my own head is going to allow me to enter into the communication with not defensiveness, not angst. It's going to allow me to enter the conversation with, hey, being open and saying, hey, this hurt me. I can, I felt this, and I know you didn't mean it, but I felt this, and it becomes a lot easier to have a conversation than going in accusatory.
Yeah.
And as unique and wonderful as we all are, that means we are all wired slightly differently, which can lead to some conflict. So once an argument starts, what advice do you have on how to fight fair?
Well, some of the advice that I use, and we use, and that we counsel other couples in, is to avoid starting an argument with an accusation. So avoid starting an argument with you always. We typically say things like, you're always late, or you never do this for me, or whatever. And we encourage people to not use the words always and never, because they're never true. And to not start a discussion with an accusation with you. Instead, begin the discussion with, or turn the discussion with, hey, I feel when this happened, when you didn't show up on time, when I expected, I felt disappointed, or I felt this. And it's very difficult. People do it, but it's very difficult to argue with someone's feelings. And it's more like, oh, I didn't mean to do that, I'm sorry. We end up typically going into a more of having a conversation about the real issues, rather than arguing over, well, I was on time. You're always late. No, I was on time 3 weeks ago. We start nitpicking over the little details, and the argument goes way off the rails, and becomes accusatory. So our natural response when somebody accuses us is to get defensive, and then we fight back. But if somebody begins the conversation with, I feel, it's, I'm not feeling like I need to get defensive, and I'm not feeling like I need to go on an attack mode. I want to have now the conversation and get to the real heart of the issue.
Yeah. And you need to make space for grace in your marriage, in yourself, and in others, right? And it's just the grace that we get from God. We need to be thankful for that and extend it to others.
I love that. Make space for grace. And how important is it to sincerely apologize for the wrongs and to forgive one another and leave the past in the past?
Very important, I think, just with anybody, right? Like, you hear it said that unforgiveness hurts you more than anyone else. But when you're in a tight marriage and a partnership, it's going to hurt anybody around you. And the shrapnel from that is going to just continue to hurt people. And so it's important for your own health. It's important for your marriage and your family and any dynamic around you to forgive and just to move on and work through things, definitely, if there's things that need to be worked through, and let go of things that just need to be forgiven and moved past.
And what about making time for date nights? Is that still something that should happen regularly, even if you have a tight budget? I know a lot of people are cutting back on things, and I think their recreation and their pleasure time is really taking a hit these days.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's ways. A lot of the excuses or a lot of the reasons are children, and I think there's ways to like babysit, share, I guess, having friends that have little kids and say, okay, this week you have all the kids, and this week I'll have all the kids, and figure out ways to take care of your kids and figure out ways it doesn't have to cost. We have lots of date nights at home, and we enjoy those, and it costs a lot less. And yeah.
And I think if you take money out of the equation, it allows you to become a lot more creative,
Yeah.
which becomes a lot more fun as to what you're going to be able to do, and saying, well, hey, let's what can we do without spending money, or even, you know, what we like to do is put into budget date nights and saying it's going to be a regular part of our finances in putting into our budget, so that we're not, you know, bracing and going, well, we can't afford to,
Yeah, and
we
then it's
can't
not
do
as
that.
fun.
Then it's not as fun. Then you're feeling the pressure of
Yeah.
the finances as well, which takes away from the whole purpose of the night anyway. So
Yeah. Well, and then you're prioritizing again. In your budget, you might need to cut back on different things, but you're like, that's important because I get my date night with my husband, and that's going to be long-term importance.
Yeah.
Kelly and Joylyn Stickle are the lead pastors of Parallel Church in Lethbridge. Kelly and Joylyn, thanks so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.